So most of us know that we should be trying to decrease stress or manage our stress well for overall health. But what if you're actually addicted to stress? This might be a new concept, but I see it a lot. And we're going to unpack in this video ways that you might know if you're addicted to stress, why you might be. There's just a lot of different things that kind of go into that. And so I'm excited to unpack a little bit of that in this video in the next 10 minutes or so. So if that interests you, stick around. Let's go. So, what does it mean to be addicted to stress? It really just is the addiction to the stress hormones is really what I'm referring to here. And so how might someone know if that's the case to them? If that's the case for them, excuse me. So when we are addicted to stress or these stress hormones, it really means that our body is liking this chemical cocktail of cortisol in our system. And there's a lot of reasons why we have cortisol in the body, and they're not all bad, right? It's anti-inflammatory. It can regulate our blood sugar a little bit for us. But the thing is, cortisol is good in small amounts and in small doses. And that's the way that it really should work. But it's just this long-term exposure to cortisol that's obviously not good. And cortisol can feel really good initially. Whenever we are under stress and our body does, of course, have this response that it secretes the cortisol, it can feel good. And I mean, it's not all bad, right? We're getting this good feeling, this energy, this maybe even alertness from these stress hormones. But it's really the prolonged exposure that causes all the things that you hear are bad because of you're under stress, right? There's just a lot of different things that can come from that. And so I think that being addicted to stress can kind of look a little different for everyone, right? But I want to kind of go through some of these just to see if any of this kind of strikes a chord with you, or sometimes you can even pick out these things, in your friends or family. So first thing is that sometimes we just crave the cortisol rush from some type of workout. So somebody that is usually like waking up early to get in some kind of really intense training, or maybe they just get up and hit the floor running, they could really crave that cortisol rush from the type of workout, or just having to be, going, just get up and go first thing in the morning. And obviously our cortisol, I say obviously, our cortisol is higher in the morning because it's meant to be that way, right? We get out of bed and we get going, but it shouldn't really be this intense need for to produce that cortisol in our body. It should be a natural thing that whenever we get up, our cortisol is higher, and so it gets us going. But sometimes these intense workouts can really obviously speed that up and intensify that, and sometimes people really crave that. That's one thing. Needing coffee all day long to feel human. But when we drink coffee, it actually gives us a rise in this cortisol. And sometimes we feel like we need that little bit of boost. And sometimes we feel like it's from the caffeine, but the caffeine is actually causing the rise in those stress hormones. And so I think that's definitely something to think about when you're like, well, am I addicted to these stress hormones or not? So just something to think about. Also, whenever we seek out stressful situations or events, that may not be super obvious, like, oh, well, I'm just, I'm kind of find myself in this stressful events, and there's kind of always drama, or I always kind of have something going on. It could be that we're actually like seeking that out because we need that adrenaline rush, if you will, that cortisol release. And so that could be one thing. Maybe it's that you really love looking at the news because you get that rush, right? Whenever we have that stress response and something is stressful, we get that release of cortisol, and adrenaline lots of times comes with that. So looking at the news, having those stressful situations, like all these things I'm saying are triggering the cortisol. So sometimes when we just have that need for, even if it's like an intense show that we're watching, and we just like need. We need to read a book that's suspenseful, or we need to listen to a podcast, that might be along those same lines, or maybe it's a show. Just having the need for that because you feel like, things are just boring without it, let's say, could be an indication that you might be addicted to stress hormones. Here's an interesting one. Procrastinating on a project because getting down to the deadline gives you that surge of cortisol that you're looking for. So those things that I've mentioned would be more of the positive things that kind of, are making us, maybe not overtly, but they are actually making us feel good and giving us sort of what we need. And the next things that I wanted to talk about are some of the things, other signs and symptoms that may not obviously be very good. We might look at them as bad. So one thing is if you're sort of running on stress hormones, that you will not be able to stay asleep throughout the night, or sometimes you might not be able to go to sleep that well, but oftentimes it's that you're waking up throughout the night, and you maybe between like 1 and 3, or it could be different times, but you just have that pattern of you can't really stay asleep. That could be one sign. Also, you might notice that if you go too long between meals, like even more than an hour or so, that you get hangry and that you have this sort of blood sugar crash happening, because cortisol, like I mentioned, it can regulate our blood sugar, but if we're having way too much of it all the time, it can really make our blood sugar very it's just kind of erratic, and we can have these crashes versus a steady blood sugar that we're looking for. Sometimes it's the fact that we feel a lot better on low carb or keto. And this actually can really signify the fact that we're running off these stress hormones, because whenever we don't give our body glucose from food, which on low carb or keto, a lot of times we're not giving it glucose. We're cutting out carbs. We're cutting out sugars, anything like that. So what does our body have to do to produce these, to produce energy? Because our body runs off glucose. So if we're not giving it glucose from food, it has to get it from somewhere. And so our body can make an energy source, right? It's a more costly system than just us giving it the fuel that it needs. And so part of that system to create the energy is cortisol or stress hormones. So that could be another thing. If you feel really, really, really good on that, could signify that you are truly sort of addicted to stress hormones. Fasting can definitely fall into this category as well. And maybe it's you feel like you can't really focus on anything or do anything if you're not fasting. Like you have all of this just clarity while you are fasting, and if you're not, you find it really hard to concentrate. And again, same deal with fasting, that a lot of times that it is on low carb or keto, we're just not giving our body its preferred form of energy, and so it has to make that energy. It has to make the glucose. So that could be something to think about. And also, if we just are kind of always stuck in this cycle of wanting instant results, that can definitely be another sort of indication that we might be addicted. Our body might really be addicted to stress hormones. And what I see normally as the biggest contributors to this on a day-to-day basis, to really sort of think about how we can not be addicted to stress hormones. If you're like, yeah, I checked off a lot of those boxes. So how can we kind of get out of this cycle and hopefully not be addicted to stress hormones? And so we don't feel like we constantly have to be doing anything, or we constantly need that little hit of energy. Here are some things just to think about. So we really do need to think about having a balanced blood sugar. And so it does really matter how we eat, amount that we eat, the type that we eat, kind of the structure of eating. This is really important because, of course, this kind of does go a little bit back to blood sugar, because cortisol really does affect your blood sugar a lot. It's a glucocorticoid type of molecule, and so it can really, really affect your blood sugar a lot. And we want to give our body its preferred source of fuel, which is glucose from foods. So we don't want our body to have to make that. So that's just something to think about when we are talking about how to kind of break this cycle. And so many of us are maybe not even doing this on purpose, but we're actually under eating. We're not taking in enough calories. And so, I mentioned things like low carb or keto. It could even be not that you're under eating, it's that you're underrepresenting a macronutrient that can cause the same stress response. So I really am a big fan of balance, as much as we can, as far as not cutting out an entire food group. Obviously, maybe at different times in our lives, like it's good to maybe not eat as much of X, but in general, balance is always going to serve you well. So I just want you to think about, how you're eating. Is it in a stress state? What you're eating. Are you getting nourishing foods in every 3 to 4 hours during the day? Are you eating a balance of, protein, fat, and carbs at every meal? Those types of things can be really helpful. Also, another thing to think about when, that I kind of already mentioned is exercise. So what are you doing for exercise? Are you going at it hardcore, full force, 7 days a week? Or, how are you in there? Or maybe you're not doing any exercise. So let's meet in the middle. I really like the 2 W's, which are walking and weights. So I think that we can do a lot just with walking. It's a great way to move our body. But weights really does help us to continue to really build muscle, which can help us long term versus something like maybe cardio, which really doesn't give us any long term benefit, and it can be very taxing on the body. So I really do like walking and weights, but it depends on where you are with that. I just wanted to mention sleep is another really big thing to help balance our body and to decrease the need for stress hormones. Getting really great sleep is important. And I know it's kind of could be really frustrating if you're like, yeah, I'm trying to get good sleep, but because of this, maybe I'm not. So some of these other things might be helpful to then, of course, in turn, work on your sleep. But just trying to keep blood sugar balanced throughout the day in check as much as possible is really underrated when you think about taking the overall stress burden off. And just trying not to kick off that cortisol response, right? Giving our body what it likes to run off of, which is glucose from food sources. So I think that is really, really important when you think about how to maybe get out of this vicious cycle of being addicted to stress hormones. One last thing I just wanted to mention is that, we're never going to eliminate all stress from our body. And sometimes we've been in this cycle for a really long time. And so there's always grace there. There's always, it's just going to be a journey. And you can't compare your journey to another person's, but it's just being more in tune with what's going on in our body. Are we addicted to these stress hormones, and how can we maybe break that cycle? So really in this whole process, just trying to make our body help our body to become more resilient to stress, and just paying attention to these things like nutrition and exercise and reducing other types of stressors is really going to pay off so much. So I hope this has been insightful. Maybe you've never thought about this before. So I would love to know your thoughts in the comments, or if you have a question, of course, you can put it there. I love to talk about these types of things. I have a new video every Wednesday that comes out. So check back for more topics like this. You can always hit the subscribe button and give it a thumbs up. That would be awesome. And if you are interested in this type of information, of course, check back here every Wednesday. But I'm on Instagram. I share over there quite a bit. Of course, my website is kind of a hub for all my past videos and blogs and ways to work with me and free resources there. So go check out that. I've got some links for you down in the description below. But I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you guys on the next video.